David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Joe Biden is running for president, arguably the biggest shakeup to the Democratic primary field since Bernie Sanders announced that he was running and sort of became instantly the front runner. And of course, up until the most recent Emerson poll, even without being an official candidate, Joe Biden was actually still in the lead in 2020 Democratic presidential polling. And we'll get to the polling in a moment. That's not where I want to start. Just hours ago, former Vice President Joe Biden announced that he is running. The 76-year-old put out a 3-minute video explaining why he was running, or I guess justifying his run, you can say. Now, in the video, which you can find online, we won't play the entire thing for you, he didn't discuss policy, really. He didn't really talk much about his credentials and his experience other than sort of by implication. He focused on the circumstances in the United States that make him want to run. He talked about Donald Trump's "find people on both sides" statement. He talked about Trump as sort of a force that has coalesced white nationalism and extremism of different kinds and made a kind of situational case for his candidacy and for the eventual removal of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, not super surprisingly, welcoming Joe Biden into the race with a nickname, Sleepy Joe, which I don't know if it's new. I don't know if he's used that one before. Maybe he has. I know he's used sleepy about other people. Sleepy-eyed, I know he's used. But it's also not very funny. Donald Trump tweeting, "Welcome to the race, Sleepy Joe. I only hope you have the intelligence, long in doubt, to wage a successful primary campaign. It will be nasty. You will be dealing with people who truly have some very sick and demented ideas. But if you make it, I will see you at the capital S, capital G starting gate." So nicknames, Low Energy Jeb, Little Marco, Crooked Hillary, Crazy Bernie, those at least have some kind of comedic ring. Sleepy Joe seems particularly dumb because Biden's not sleepy. You can disagree with the guy on politics. You can say, as I do, that he's to your right, that he's not progressive enough, and I think there's a fair critique there. But Biden's not sleepy. He's a formidable debater who could crush Trump in a debate. Also not very sleepy that even before announcing last week in an Emerson poll, Biden was ahead of Trump in a hypothetical matchup by 6 points, the strongest in any hypothetical matchup. He was followed, I believe, by Bernie versus Trump, Beto versus Trump, Kamala versus Trump, Buttigieg, and then Elizabeth Warren, sort of in that order. So this is before Biden was even a candidate, had the biggest lead in a hypothetical matchup over Trump from the Democratic field. And then even more recently, we have a poll from this week from Morning Consult and Politico, where Biden is +8 over Trump in a hypothetical poll, 42 to 34. Of course, in that one, more people sort of unsure or undecided in that. So you could argue it's a less precise poll. But the point is, Sleepy Joe, maybe more projection because Trump realizes Joe Biden, politics aside, which I will get to, don't destroy me yet, a strong challenger to President Trump's reelection. Will President Obama endorse Joe Biden? We don't know. President Obama, his office putting out a statement this morning praising Biden, but not endorsing him at this point in time. Will the McCain family endorse Joe Biden? Now, you might say, David, why are you even asking about that? This is a really interesting thing. Yesterday, in advance of Joe Biden's announcement, it was reported by the Washington Examiner that the McCain family, in other words, Cindy McCain, John McCain's widow, Meghan McCain, John McCain's daughter, would be breaking with the Republican Party to support Joe Biden over Donald Trump because of the disaster that they believe Donald Trump to be, sort of continuing the rivalry, the disagreement, the bad blood between John McCain and Donald Donald Trump even after John McCain is no longer alive, reported by the Washington Examiner, but immediately denied by Cindy McCain, Senator McCain's widow. Who knows? It may be an accurate report that is just too early, and the McCains don't want to have that attributed to them at this point in time. It may just be a false report. I don't know, but what we do know is that there are now two very strong candidates in the Democratic field, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, on the basis of polling. On the basis of polling, you have seen Bernie and Biden at the top of every single poll. You then have this next tier, which includes Buttigieg. It has sort of shifted from including Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, etc. And then you have a whole bunch of sort of weaker candidates that are in the 0 to 1 and 1 to 3% range. You now have Biden and Bernie as the two kind of fighting it out at the top of these polls. My politics, to get to the political analysis, my politics, if you're in my audience, you know, if you watched yesterday's show where I updated my political compass results, I'm to the left of Joe Biden economically, and I'm to the left of Joe Biden on the sort of social libertarian versus authoritarian spectrum. My politics are more like Bernie's. My politics are more like Elizabeth Warren's. There's a dose of Andrew Yang in there as well, which is why I've sort of identified them as my top three candidates. Biden is to my right. But from a practical perspective, Joe Biden is somebody that in a one-on-one debate with Donald Trump gives me confidence. I'm not saying that I like the policy of Joe Biden over some of these other Democratic candidates, but what I am suggesting you do is go back and check out the vice presidential debates that Joe Biden had with Paul Ryan, and you will see that the younger than Trump Paul Ryan, the more fast-thinking than Trump Paul Ryan, did not even stand a chance against Joe Biden. I mean, just not even close. It was embarrassing how Biden was toying with Paul Ryan, and Paul Ryan, much smarter, much more knowledgeable, much quicker thinking than Donald Trump, which to me says that Donald Trump would get absolutely crushed and embarrassed by Donald Trump by Joe Biden during debates. But then we do get to the political question. Biden's not super progressive by any means. We now are going to have a pretty clear establishment versus non-establishment dynamic developing. My guess is that Biden entering the race is a signal more to the other would-be establishment candidates. What I mean by that is initially it seemed maybe the DNC and Democratic establishment is kind of getting behind Kamala Harris. She didn't sort of grow her polling support significantly. And then the establishment energy sort of seems to have shifted to Pete Buttigieg, and he reportedly has been attending the Stop Bernie Democratic establishment meetings, and he's been rising in the polls, but still single digits from what I've seen, maybe cracking 10% in one of them. Joe Biden, I believe, consolidates the establishment support, the anti-Bernie wing of the Democratic Party, I believe now coalesces behind Joe Biden. If you're not super into the sort of Bernie Warren wing of the Democratic Party based on politics, it seems that your vote now goes behind Joe Biden in great likelihood, and we'll have new post-Biden announcement polling maybe in the middle of next week, maybe towards the end of next week. Maybe there's a new poll being conducted already and we'll have results by Monday. We'll see how that looks. But Joe Biden is representative of the old school Democratic Party, period. That has appeal to centrist Democrats, to traditional Democrats. The question is, does the Democratic primary electorate want that in total? And if they do, is it something that can defeat Donald Trump? Early polling suggests maybe it can, but dynamics in these races can change very quickly. And then there's the Hillary connection question. I mean, is it in some way, is Joe Biden too much a reminder of or sort of connected to the Hillary Clinton wing of the party in a way that could be damaging once it gets to the general election? And there are two possibilities here, broadly speaking. The first possibility is Democrats aren't nearly as progressive as the enthusiastic support for Bernie Sanders suggests. I'm not saying I think this is the case. I'm saying this is a possibility. And Biden entering the race is going to instantly unite the Democratic primary electorate around Joe Biden and against Donald Trump in a way that is positive for Joe Biden. The other possibility is that Democratic voters are sick of establishment politics. They associate Biden with the DNC favoring Hillary over Bernie in 2016, and that the Democratic primary electorate says, no, it's time for something new. Biden is old school. Biden is boring. Biden is from the Hillary wing of the party, and we want something else. Either way, you have to get eventually to the age of the two Democratic Party frontrunners. I'm not an identity voter. I am a issues voter, and I consider electability, and sometimes identity can be connected to that, but I am not an identity politics voter. We have a dynamic developing where you have 77-year-old Bernie Sanders leading the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and 76-year-old Joe Biden very quickly coming to the front of the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. So based on polling right now, it's not my opinion, I'm just saying look at the polls and at the fact that Bernie and Joe are leading the Democratic primary. The two most likely face-offs that we are to have in 2020 as of today, and things can change, are 72-year-old Donald Trump versus 76-year-old Joe Biden. They'll both be older in 2020, of course. Or 72-year-old Donald Trump against 77-year-old Bernie Sanders. I don't vote on identity, but how are we to interpret that demographic reality about how this is shaping up? There's some good news no matter what your view is on Biden, which is the will he or won't he run stuff is over. Now people who are saying, well, I would vote for Bernie if Joe doesn't run, but if Joe runs, I'm probably voting for Joe. We can get away from that now. So now we are going to get sort of clearer, less kind of conditional, hypothetical polling. The polling now is Joe Biden is running. Do you support him? And now we're going to have to at some point really think about Joe Biden's politics. Joe Biden originally against gay marriage, for the Patriot Act, consented to the war in Iraq. And back in 2016, it was the sort of end of being able to justify those positions by saying, times have changed. The world has changed. I am a new person. I have revised my views. I've had sort of an awakening. That still was maybe passable in 2016. In 2020, the my views have evolved and those votes sort of made sense at the time thing, I think is a much more difficult pill to swallow for Democratic voters, and we'll have to see what the effect is of that. I don't like it. As I said, Joe Biden's politics are to my right, but a formidable debater and no question that he will have an impact on this race. So it's all happening, and we will check in next week about how the polling is affected by Joe Biden officially entering the race. I do want to hear from you in the meantime. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at dpakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let me say a quick thank you today to Jay Hayes. Jay is today's new David Pakman Show member of the day. We have an interesting voicemail later on today about what's the real viability of independent media long term. And it really, for us, comes down to people like Jay saying, I like the David Pakman Show, so I'm going to support it financially. And someone who made that decision almost 5 years ago is today's sustaining member of the day, Brian St. John. So thanks to Brian, thanks to Jay. Join them as members at www.joinpakman.com. We have a David Pakman Show subreddit, one of the biggest progressive subreddits on Reddit. Nearly 10,000 of our viewers and listeners at davidpakman.com/REDDIT regularly participating in political discussion. I encourage you to join and subscribe there for free. One interesting post I spotted this morning is somebody saw me in the cannabis documentary Grass is Greener. There is indeed a new Netflix documentary entitled Grass is Greener. There is like a 3-second clip of me in it right after a very short clip of our friend from the Young Turks, Anna Kasparian. I'm commenting about a black man who was sentenced to some extraordinarily long prison sentence because of draconian drug laws. And I got a bunch of texts from friends, including friends in the marijuana industry, saying, David, you're in the documentary about an hour in, and I saw it, and it's cool. I didn't know I was going to be in it. They did not pay licensing fees, which is fine. I just know people sometimes wonder, do we get paid when I appear? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. In this case, they didn't even tell me, and that's fine. They're using my clip under fair use. I'm not a hypocrite. Don't worry. I don't know anything else about the documentary. I haven't had time to watch it other than the 3 seconds I'm in and the preceding 4 in which Anna Kasparian appears. But from what my friends have told me, it's a very interesting documentary, so check it out. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, a post from Ardell Avanda, or Ardella Vanda, saying, is it better to bring up and call out the disingenuous right-wing commentators or hosts, or ignore them and not give them a platform? Curious what you guys think. People like the intellectual dark web, Tomi Lauren, I don't know how she pronounces her name, Steven Crowder, Jesse Lee Peterson. Is it worth it, or does debunking them or talking about them give them even more publicity? This is a perfect opportunity for me to announce I will be having a debate. It's going to be a conversation. I'm going to be having a debate, we'll still call it, with Steven Bonnell II, also known to some of you in the gaming world as Destiny. Next week, it's scheduled for Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I will be broadcasting it live on our YouTube channel. Destiny will be broadcasting live on Twitch, where we are going to debate platforming and boycotts. Two kind of different but related topics related to censorship and speech. And we are going to debate exactly this. When do you platform someone responsibly? How do you platform people responsibly? When does giving them a platform do more harm than good by exposing people to their crazy ideas? So we are going to have a really great conversation live on my YouTube channel and his Twitch channel. Tuesday, I hope I'm saying this right, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and we will address it then, so I won't address this question now. Join the discussion at davidpakman.com/reddit. Let's talk about impeachment a little bit, but not actually about impeachment. We're going to take a break from impeachment talk in earnest today, but I want to talk about a sort of corollary or tangential issue, which is that Donald Trump is now threatening to use the Supreme Court to block possible impeachment. Now, before I even tell you what's going on and the sort of legal underpinnings of this, there's a bigger picture that I need to paint for you. I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't bring this up. If you're the president and you're talking this frequently about your own impeachment, something is very, very wrong. It's not normal for presidents to have to argue against their own impeachment this much. Trump previously said, people are talking about impeachment. How do you impeach a president who's doing so well? Now he's saying, if impeachment was attempted, I would go to the Supreme Court to prevent my impeachment. Now, I understand Trump thinking that. He's thinking, I have manipulated the Supreme Court thanks to Mitch McConnell, partially before he was president, blocking Merrick Garland's nomination. He has selected 3 people to the Supreme Court. He believes, maybe rightly, that he has the Supreme Court in his pocket. But unfortunately, this doesn't really work. But let's think it through. Reminder in terms of the context. Growing movement for impeachment. Had a clip yesterday that got 200,000 views overnight about this issue. Prominent Democrats saying it's time for impeachment. Prominent legal scholars. But we're not going to dig into that piece today. Trump tweets, the Mueller report, despite being written by angry Democrats and Trump haters, and with unlimited money behind it, $35 million. Of course, it's so stupid. The cost of an investigation is not... To suggest that people are throwing money at it is very disingenuous. Didn't lay a glove on me. Well, did you read it? Because it says substantial evidence of obstruction. Trump goes on to say, I did nothing wrong. If the partisan Dems ever tried to impeach, I would first head to the U.S. Supreme Court. The analysis here is really simple. Impeachment and removal of the president works like this. The House of Representatives files articles of impeachment and sort of works as the prosecutor. The Senate then votes almost like they are the jury and ultimately decides whether or not to remove the president from power. There's nothing in there that includes the possibility of going to the Supreme Court, period. The power of the House and Senate to bring and investigate and adjudicate impeachment is their sole power. The House brings charges. The Senate is like the jury, period. There's no mechanism to appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decides whether or not to hear previously decided cases which have requested appeal. Impeachment is a congressional process. This isn't an argument I'm making for or against impeachment. It's just another one of these examples of Trump doesn't get it. And it's really important to understand this. Trump claiming that he will try to use the Supreme Court to block impeachment fits two common themes of the Trump presidency. Theme number one, Trump doesn't actually understand how the Constitution or checks and balances or government work. Okay, that's theme number one, which is fomented, confirmed by Trump saying he would try to use the Supreme Court to block impeachment. Number two, it's Trump's autocratic, authoritarian tendencies. Thinking that the Supreme Court has anything to do with impeachment and that Trump could go to the Supreme Court and say, hey, stop the impeachment from happening, that shows, like with much other material that we have, that Trump has a fundamental lack of understanding of how any of this stuff works, confirmed once again. But of course, the idea that Trump could go to the Supreme Court, which is now made up 1/3 of by people made up to 33% of people who Trump handpicked, making it one of the most conservative Supreme Courts in a long time. The idea that he thinks he could go to them to get him out of being impeached is that authoritarian, autocratic tendency that we've been observing in Trump since day one of the presidency. He's sort of like his base in that sense. Ignorant of the law, ignorant of history, ignorant of how government works, but really confident that he's correct and that he's smart and that he's knowledgeable and that he's the right person to be making decisions for our country. And it's completely embodied in his idea that if anybody tries to impeach him, anybody being Democrats in the House and Senate, that he will go to the Supreme Court in order to prevent that from happening. Will it ever get to that point? I don't know. But we will leave it there on impeachment for today and maybe follow up on it tomorrow because there actually is more impeachment news, but sort of feel we've been talking about it enough lately. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at david.pakman. It's something this week, I believe it's the picture of me at that Passover Seder on Saturday. Every time I look at Instagram on my phone, I have 50 new followers and 10 new comments on my picture of me at a Passover Seder, as if it's a big deal. I don't really know why people are so up in arms about it, but they are. And you can see the infamous picture with me holding a glass of wine, not Manischewitz, I will mention, nice wine, and wearing a bright blue yarmulke on my Instagram page at david.pakman. Let me take a quick break and we'll be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Mike Gravel, who is a former U.S. Senator serving from 1969 to 1981. He's not only a former presidential candidate, but is now a 2020 Democratic presidential contender. Senator Gravel, really a pleasure having you on. Let's just jump into it. Why are you running? Why have you added your name to the long list of candidates running?
Well, I added it because the young man, about 17 years old, and his partner, Henry Williams, it was David Oakes, who contacted me and asked me if I would run for president. And I said, do you have any idea how old I am? And they said, well, that doesn't matter. What counts is your position on the issues. And they had shown me the research that they did on my background and also on Tulsi Gabbard. And they just felt that the issues that I had to present should be presented to the American public in the course of the presidential election. The way to do that, of course, is to be able to get in the debates. And so they took on the task of trying to get 65,000 donors. They've got presently around a third or almost pushing towards a half of the donors. And they've got over $70,000 that they've raised. And they came out to visit me about a month ago. David couldn't come because he got hospitalized just before his flight. But a gentleman by the name of Church and also Henry Williams came out, and we did some videotaping and went over with David the platform that we're ascribing to. And so that's what's got us into this situation. I've turned over the Twitter account that I never used from the 2008 campaign, and they've been handling it very diligently. And so I'm not doing any work. It was part of the plan that I wouldn't have to do any work other than be interviewed by people like you, David.
So, okay, let's start getting into some of this stuff, because as you mentioned, you've turned over control of the Twitter account to these young guys. Is it true what I'm reading, that sometimes they post stuff under your name that you don't even really agree with?
I don't know about what I agree with. We went over great detail. They always ask me before they post something if I agree with this, and I've told them generally I agree. Now, there may be something I did caution them about being negative on other candidates, because I don't think that's productive, because we're an issue situation. And I don't know of any issues that they've put up that I would disagree with. And so if somebody does see something they think that it's uncharacteristic of my past, then they could just let me know, and I would discuss it with what I call the gravelistas, the kids, and who are managing the campaign. I'm not managing the campaign. I make myself available for interviews like this, but that's the extent of it.
Okay, so here's one thing that I sort of want to get directly into, which is, since you were a senator between 69 and 81 and 2016, right, so pre-Trump, the dynamics and the sort of tenor and tone in the Senate and in American politics changed significantly, because that's a long period of time. And of course, since the election of Donald Trump, with the advent of so much policy being communicated on Twitter by the president, and the sort of language and vocabulary and style that is now being adopted by more and more members of the House and Senate, how different is it really from what you see now compared to the way it was when you were in the Senate, in terms of the way politics is done? Or is it superficially different, but still basically working the same way in your estimation?
No, it's not acting the same way. The Republican Party back then had credibility. You may not have agreed with them, but they essentially weren't crazy. They were reasonable people that had conservative views. What you have today with the Trumpian, not the Republican Party, but it's the Trumpian Party, because the Republicans have lined up to a man, except probably for Lisa Murkowski and the senator from Maine,
Susan Collins.
but the rest of them, it's an abomination. And can you get? Am I still being recorded or what?
You're with us, Senator.
Okay, the sort of situation today is much worse because of the Republican Party, which has turned around and totally capitulated itself to the will of Donald Trump, who essentially is a narcissistic fool. And so if he is that, and he's proven himself to be that, then the Republican Party, to a man or a woman, is behind him totally, so that leaves the situation, which I think is very unusual, and that is that if Trump loses the election, which I dearly hope he will drag down the Republican Party with him. And so this could be a really an earth-moving situation in 2020. But so it wasn't that way before. Now, before it was bad enough. They had the divisions, and the things were done improperly, but more subtly than they are today. Here, it's really overt and truthfully many times ridiculous.
What do you think it would take to get back, not that things were perfect when you were in the Senate, but there are some analyses I've seen which show that when you were in the Senate, the frequency with which Republicans and Democrats would work together to get certain things done was significantly higher than it is today. The level of division today is significantly higher. What do you think it would take to get back in the direction of the period between 69 and 81 when you were in the Senate, to get at least some working together? Would it be a national emergency or calamity of some kind? Would it be, just what would it take?
Well, what would it take? I don't think it can be repaired. I'm coming out with a book in this summer, which is, the title of it is Human Governance, the Failure of Representative Government and a Solution, which is the people. I personally believe that representative government has failed. And I don't mean just now. It goes back to the beginning of our Constitution, where slavery was embedded forever, infinity, and the genocide that we committed against the American Indians. So, no, our situation is better because of scientific advancement, not because of governance advancement. And so the only answer that I can think of is to empower the people to make laws. And I've spent the last 25 years working on that particular issue, and have a constitutional amendment and a federal law, which would be the legislative procedures, because people can't just make law without procedures. That's anarchy. That's what we see with Brexit right now. What they need to do is to have a constitutional amendment that lays out some vital aspects of this, and then a process to enact this into law. In other words, it's the people that can make the change straight away. And this will surprise a lot of people, because conventional wisdom is that you can only change the government through Article 5 of the Constitution. Well, that's how the government does it. But what about the people? Are the people stuck with the structure that's 300 years old and acts that way? And you have science which going out and making discoveries and changes and brought human society to a higher level than it's ever been. But what's holding it back is the structure of governance, which is 300 years old and hasn't really been repaired at all. And that's what I'm hoping. So when you say, is there a chance? No, I think we're stuck. We're going to continue what's been going on for the last 300 years, which is not admirable. Oh, we build it up like, we're great, we're superior, we're a city on a hill. No, give me a break. Our conduct today in the world is appalling. And when you look at the nuclear threat that we have, it's literally a suicide pact that we have that's been devised within the Pentagon. Give you an example. We're spending $1.7 trillion. Now, if you look at the cost overruns, the real money that's going to be spent is going to be around $3 trillion. So we're spending $3 trillion to refurbish our nuclear arsenal. And the purpose of that, stated by the head of the Joint Chiefs and by the Pentagon, is that we want to be able to strike terror in the hearts of our opponents so that they will know that we have the will to use these nuclear devices. And of course, we're probably the only country in the world of the 8 nuke countries. We're the one that says that we're prepared to use it as a first strike. Now, here's the kicker. The ability to use these nuclear devices is zero. If any country were to use its nuclear capability to attack another country, don't worry about the retaliation. They're going to trigger a nuclear winter and we're all going to die.
Yeah. I feel like that's just missed in many of the discussions about nuclear proliferation. Senator, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because a lot of your critiques are not just critiques of the right, but they're also critiques of the Democratic Party. What one issue would you like to see the Democratic Party in general move on? What issue would that be? What do you think the Democratic Party is most wrong about right now?
Well, the one issue that I would be very fond of is single-payer health care. There's no, the Obamacare package was really a subsidy to the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry, and they've sold it. It's in great detail, and so, but there's no reason why we can't have single-payer health care. I avail myself of veterans. The VA, and also sometimes Medicare, since I have both. But there's no reason why the entire American population should have Medicare, and or the equivalent of the VA, and it costs money. But then I was just pointing out to you that we got the Defense Department that is using up $3 trillion. Well, we can pay for Medicare for everybody, and we can wipe out the school debt, and we can pay whatever. So the money's there. We don't have to raise taxes. And that's what the Republicans pointed out. Oh, the Democrats are going to raise taxes. You don't have to do that. Just bring about some sanity in our defense posture. Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, was asked as he was leaving office, how much could we really cut the federal budget, the defense budget? He said 50%. Well, look at if we did away with the triad, which is with the nukes, we have nukes for the Air Force, we got nukes for the Navy, we got nukes for the Army. If we did away with the Army and Air Force, we'd still have an unbelievable security with the 12 Trident submarines that any one of them with 280 warheads could hold the world hostage. So we're in a ridiculous situation where we're spending like fools on a military capability that is unwarranted. I'm not saying that we don't need some defense posture.
Of course.
Like I say, our Trident submarines could handle our defense to fairly well. So we could cut back on a whole bunch of things, close a lot of bases around the world, and begin to bring some sanity to our budgetary process. And that is to be able to take care of the health care of the people, to take care of the education of the people, and to build back our infrastructure. There was a recent article by the concerned scientists that said that what we got to do is we got to make our opponents comfortable and emotionally comfortable, because if they think we're going to attack them, then they're going to react, and that's where you get into a situation where accidents could occur in the whole nuclear area, and that's because all of our appointments are threats, supposedly, and I say supposedly because I don't think they're real in this regard. But when you look at what's going on in the nuclear and in the cyber stage, we're talking about a new kind of warfare. But we keep manufacturing all the tools for the old kind of warfare, tanks and artillery pieces. That's not the future. The future is going to be either a nuclear accident, which is going to destroy the planet, or it's going to be a long-term plan of suicide with respect to the environment. So we have to begin to handle these questions, and they're improperly handled today. So when you ask me, is there any hope with respect to the Congress? Here, you're not even going to hear a member running for president that's going to bring up the military-industrial complex, except Tulsi Gabbard. And she's not getting traction because mainstream media, which is controlled by the military-industrial complex, is going to try to sideline and marginalize her.
Well, I mean, Bernie Sanders did speak quite a bit about the military-industrial complex in his Fox News town hall last week. I don't know if you saw that.
I did see that, and that's the first time that he's done that, that I noticed. And he said it very clearly, that he did not do a good job on foreign policy in his last run, and that now he's spending time getting up to speed on foreign policy. I would hope if he gets the nomination that he would select Tulsi Gabbard as his vice president.
Maybe he will. That's been mentioned. That's certainly a possibility. And he said he would be interested in having a woman. Senator Gravel, let me pause briefly. We've been speaking with former U.S. Senator Mike Gravel, who is running for president. This is the end of the interview for the broadcast show, but check out the full interview on YouTube because we're going to continue talking to him just a little bit more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump's brain sort of weirdly glitched again, and he spoke total nonsense yesterday to an audience at the Prescription Drug Abuse and Heroin Summit of 2019. And we've talked about this before, and before I show you the video, the most important thing I want to explain is that this is different than when George W. Bush said weird things. Like, I'm not trying to defend George W. Bush, nor do I think he deserves any defending, but in this case, the comparison is sort of instructive. When Bush said something like, "When wings take dream," he just messed up a quote, right? When Bush said, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, you can't get fooled again," there wasn't an indication that his brain was glitching any more than his sort of normal state of cognition. But with Donald Trump, these very strange glitches are starting to pile up. And much like Dr. John Gartner has been predicting when we've interviewed him on the program, they're happening more and more frequently. Check this out from yesterday.
We will not solve this epidemic overnight, but we will stop. There's just nothing going to stop us, no matter how you cut it. I know some of the people in this room, nothing stops you. Nothing stops you, I can tell you. We will never stop until our job is done. And then maybe we'll have to find something new. And I hope that's going to be soon, but we will succeed. We have results that are unbelievable.
Seems to be kind of a combination of misreading his teleprompter and getting visibly confused, and there aren't ever really good explanations for these. And the common thread is that you see in Trump's expression the slight recognition that he knows he's doing or saying something a little bit odd, but it's just beyond his control in a way. Here's another example, the oranges of the investigation.
And I hope that this investigation now, which is finished, it's totally finished, no collusion, no obstruction. I hope they now go and take a look at the oranges of the investigation, the beginnings of that investigation. You look at the origin of the investigation, where it started, how it started, who started it, whether it's McCabe or Comey or a lot of them. Where does it go? How high up in the White House did it go? You will all get Pulitzer Prizes, okay? You're going to all get Pulitzer Prizes. You should have looked at it a long time ago. And that's the only thing that's disappointing to me about the Mueller report. The Mueller report, I wish, covered the oranges, how it started, the beginnings of the investigation.
We still never really got an explanation for that or for God bless the United States. Originally, there was speculation about dentures. Then Trump's medical report didn't say anything about dentures. Rich dudes also usually get dental implants, not dentures. Remember this one?
Let us rethink old assumptions and open our hearts and minds to possible and possibilities. And finally, I ask the leaders of the region, political and religious, Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, to join us in the noble quest for lasting peace. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Israel. God bless the Palestinians, and God bless the United States. Thank you very much.
And then there are these other examples when Trump couldn't find his limo, which was right in front of him, and started wandering off. You might remember that. There's the time that he showed up in the White House to sign an executive order and then just walked out of the room without even signing it.
Thank you, everybody. You're going to see some very, very strong results very, very quickly. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mike Pence had to pretend that they were planning on signing it in some other room all along. And then there's that really bizarre moment when Trump just sort of wandered away from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as they were supposed to do a handshake and a picture and had to be called back. And then maybe most odd, remember when Rudy Giuliani was literally 2 feet across the table directly in front Donald Trump, closer than this camera is to me right now, and Trump was looking around the room for him?
With that, I want to introduce Rudy Giuliani, and he's going to be working with Jared Kushner and with Tom Bossert, who are also here. And Rudy's very much of an expert on cybersecurity. It's been a very important thing to him and to what he does. And maybe I'll ask Rudy to say a few words.
Well, thank you very, very much, Mr. President. First of all, congratulations on.
We could really do these all day. There's walking away from the Argentinian president at the G20 in Argentina. There is a lot of this stuff. And the theme is barely holding it together, visibly struggling to put together a coherent thought, barely able to finish a sentence, barely able to sort of complete some kind of logical and sequential argument, never mind stay remotely on topic. And it's not like anything we've seen before. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what it is. We've had mental health professionals who say it's a pre-dementia state. We've gotten other explanations. I don't know what to make of it, but I'm open to hearing thoughts from you about it. Okay, so we've been talking in the context of the 2020 Democratic primary about this issue of should convicted felons have the right to vote after they have done their time, and should they have the right to vote while they are still in prison? And this is all part of a broader movement that exists on the American right to make it more difficult for people who are likely to vote for Democrats to vote. We've seen this targeting poor people. We've seen this targeting minorities. We've seen this targeting individuals on the basis of the perceived or known political orientation of particular parts of the country. And most of the left seems united about the fact that eventually felons should get the right to vote at some point. But it has become more of a discussion as to whether people who are in prison, whether people who are still, whose freedom is still being kept from them, should have the right to vote. So we did a poll on the David Pakman Show community tab yesterday. And I want to share the results with you now because they are very, very interesting. 49% of the 15,000 respondents say that convicted felons should have the right to vote while in prison, whereas 43% believe that convicted felons should get the right to vote back once their prison time or parole or probation has ended. So what's overwhelming is that 92% of our audience does believe that at some point, convicts should get the right to vote, but there's disagreement over whether it's while in prison or not. Now, I think there's a real discussion to have about serious violent criminals who are in prison without the possibility of parole, okay? If you have a serial murderer with no chance of ever being in society again because they're in prison without the possibility of parole, maybe you can make the case that they shouldn't have the right to influence a society in which they will not be participating ever by voting. That may be the case, but it's a mistake to start there. And that's why it was a dirty trick to say to Bernie, wait a second, you're okay with the Boston bomber voting? Because the reality is not about the Boston bomber or Timothy McVeigh as the most important thing. If you're in prison for marijuana possession, which in some places is criminal, in some places is a civil infraction, depending on the state, should you not be able to vote because you're in prison for marijuana possession? If you stole a television and later were caught with pot and you're now a repeat offender and you're in prison, I'm fine with that person voting. I don't believe that that justifies taking away a right that so many people worked so hard to obtain and is a key part of being a participant in society. You very quickly realize when you actually start going through the scenarios that most people in prison should have the right to vote. So we shouldn't start with the edge cases or the worst cases like, should the Boston bomber get a chance to vote? Should Timothy McVeigh, if he was alive and in prison, get a chance to vote? We shouldn't default to take voting rights away from everyone in prison because there are murderers without the possibility of parole and they really shouldn't be voting. Well, maybe if you have no possibility of parole, you're not allowed to vote. But most people in prison are not murderers. And I would actually go even further. I believe that letting imprisoned Americans vote has positive externalities. Getting people involved in the political system is going to reduce the percentage of people that go back to prison for crimes. The more involved you are, the more you have something not to lose hope over, the more you have community, the more you feel like you have a stake in what is going on around you, the less likely you are to commit crime. And that's why I'm fine having the debate about should everyone in prison get to vote? I understand that some of these more extreme cases, maybe the answer is no. But most people who are in prison should have the right to vote, particularly when you consider why many of those people are in prison to begin with. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I got about the future of independent media.
Hi, David. My name is Steve. I was wondering what you think about the long-term future of independent media like yours on YouTube. You've talked a lot recently about your videos getting demonetized for basically random reasons that don't make much sense, and I've seen other people having similar issues, and it seems like ultimately shows like yours are reliant on a platform that you don't control, that doesn't really have any transparency, and that's moving towards this fear of anything they find quote-unquote controversial, which seems like ultimately it's going to turn into what cable TV has become. And I was wondering if you have any ideas about finding alternatives to YouTube or how to fight that on the platform.
So listen, here's the thing. The thing about alternatives to YouTube, the audience is on YouTube. So if I say I'm switching to some other minor player, I can do that. Maybe there's more transparency, maybe there's more control, but unfortunately there's no audience, which we also need. So if the situation we're in today is one where we're in slightly less trouble today if we lose all YouTube revenue than we were 2 years ago when Adpocalypse 1.0 hit. Why? Because we have more membership support today. So for me, the solution is if there's programs that you like and that you value, support them if they have a means to do so. We have something called membership, which allows people to do that. Because if enough people sign up, we can self-host our videos. We can sell ads against our videos with our own staff. And if YouTube says it's over, it doesn't really affect us. So the solution is when people unthinkingly have a cable subscription where you are funding channels you dislike. In some way, you're funding Fox News when you have a cable subscription. And a couple bucks a month could actually make a show that you like completely sort of impervious to platform attacks, demonetization, targeted boycotts, whatever. That's the opportunity. And I think that that's really the path forward. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Become a member. Speaking of the benefits of being a member and supporting the show, become a member, become a patron, and I will speak to you on the members-only bonus show in just a couple of minutes.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.